Anyhow, I was interested in the first question in very Debian models, dynamical models of disease, ecology, and economics. People have been very easily to generate poverty traps and sort of coexist in steady states, which I wonder, in interaction with shocks, may explain environmental shocks or other kinds of shocks in the system social, may explain why in some cases you may go towards a collapse or not. We don't have too many of those models, but very simple ones that are beginning to emerge create these coexisting outcomes. So that, I think, is interesting.
Well, I think we need, we need more modeling of like how the human disease pool could have formed, because there's so much we're never going to actually know. But we do have a reasonable sense of human population growth. You can say what are the largest cities in the year 500 BCE. You can say sort of what is their population density. You can say how interconnected are they. You can at least like find ways to create through proxies of transportation different kinds of parameters, estimates for how interconnected societies are. But there's just not a lot of work on modeling how these diseases evolved and persisted that starts to connect some of this DNA evidence and phylogenetic evidence for how old these pathogens are. But a lot of the major human pathogens are a few thousand years old, and so they're a product of urbanization, interconnection, and so on. And then the other thing you're saying about poverty traps, we know that the disease environment is a really powerful factor on all sorts of social phenomena. And somebody like Jeff Sachs, who looks at geography as an influence on the disease environment, as an influence on economic development, that's just an extremely powerful pathway. People who live in places where there are mosquito vectors that carry falciparum malaria are going to have different outcomes economically. But the problem is that we only have sort of data that go back a generation or two, and so it gets really hard to see the influence of diseases deeper in time. But that's one of the things I'm trying to work on, is how we can get at what did the disease environment and the disease pool look like 500 years ago, 2,000 years ago, because I think we know that it's a really powerful force, but the fact that we don't even have good global cause of death data before 1990. And you can get it for like England back to the 19th century, but England's weird and not representative. So I think the fact that it's so hard to get at like what diseases were there, that people have tended to just sort of ignore the biology of diseases and time.
Any other questions for Carl? Ricardo.
As I was thinking of, if you want to look at a case where you can say that epidemics are endogenous, I think Venezuela is a good case in point, because the collapse of the state led to the collapse in immunizations and so on, and led to the reappearance of malaria that had been eliminated back in 1960, even before the U.S. So I think that might be an interesting case point of studying that link where disease goes from collapse of the economy and the state to the biology.
Yeah, and that was a great point. There's definitely a causal link that runs that way, because so much of the conquest of infectious disease over the last 200 years is built on public health infrastructure, medical infrastructure, immunization, antibiotic delivery. And so when social systems break down, then those systems break down, and you see resurgence of things like malaria and measles in Venezuela, which is happening right now.
Okay, so the miracle is we're actually on time. I'm not sure that's ever happened at a Science Sports Symposium that I've been on. Thank you to everyone.
To understand causes, make deductions about causes, but it's still very nascent, I think, and it's a hard problem. It's a really hard, because we don't understand how we do it, and so it's be optimistic to think that we would be able to get machines to do it without understanding that.
We just have time for more, but we'll get some people who haven't spoken yet. Karen.
So my question for you is about the current fear of applications of AI in surveillance, which is getting pretty real in China with all the face recognition technologies. And given all the hacks you've shown, do you think this fear is very real, that we're going towards this dystopian surveillance state, or will people eventually get around it by wearing funny glasses or other?
That's a good question. I think that yes, a lot of countries, including our own, are adopting face recognition and other technologies as a kind of surveillance. We see that. especially in China, as you said, but also here in the U.S., police departments are adopting face recognition that they'll use it in crowded areas or on the street to try and locate criminals and so on. I do think there's going to be a big sort of cybersecurity issue because these systems are hackable. It's not something that the average person could do, but somebody with sophistication and a lot of compute power could probably do it. I think companies are starting to talk very seriously about how face recognition needs to be regulated. So like Microsoft came out saying they weren't going to sell their face recognition technology for certain uses. People are now, Google said the same thing. Amazon has been under a lot of fire for their systems and so on. So I think it's a conversation that's being had right now, and it's really important to talk about this whole idea of regulation.
So we're running out of time, but David, why don't you ask the last question? Grab the microphone, please.
A lot of fun, Melanie. A lot of fun. But I have a question. There seems to be a presumption of universality of the systems. I don't know much about AI, but take the ostrich problem. Might that not be a function of the particular AI system that's being thrown at it? And there might be other AI systems that don't have that problem? Are these kind of anecdotes?
No, these aren't anecdotes. These are real research results. There seems to be a trade-off. So deep neural networks have been by far the most successful approach to, say, visual recognition of all AI systems, of all computer vision. They are, in some sense, more vulnerable to these attacks. You can make them less vulnerable, but sometimes there's a trade-off that makes them less accurate. So there seems to be some kind of trade-off between this, at least in the world of deep neural networks, between accuracy and vulnerability, robustness.
All right, join me in thanking Melanie.
All right.
Star Wars fans, the early exposure to Nilo was through these sketchbooks, which they did at the time.
I grew up with these as well, looking at these different iterations and ideations of parts of the Star Wars universe. This is such an important part of my childhood.
Yes, no, absolutely. I think everybody has fond memories of these, and they were primarily Joe Johnston's work. I think it started on the first film they did one, but then Nilo came on board, I think in the summer of '78, worked on Empire as Joe Johnston's assistant, essentially the assistant visual effects art director, and then was. And for me, that's one of the most interesting things about Nilo is he's one of those sort of, Generation 1 guys who's in there working hand in hand with Lucas in the room with just, it would have been a table like this with him, George Lucas, Joe Johnston, Ralph McQuarrie going, what's an Ewok? And how cool is that?
No, it's insane. And to elaborate on the story, I actually know Nilo and worked with him back in the mid-'90s. I knew Nilo before I worked for him as a designer of the Slave One. Of course, one of my all-time favorite ships. And I loved Star Wars for first putting the cockpit where I didn't expect it on the Millennium Falcon. That felt non-standard. And then the Slave One was like, what? The whole ship blew my freaking mind.
What's it doing?
But I got to work with Nilo on both Flubber and Turbulent 3. And I got to watch, what we got here is some iterations of sketches, and many different sketches sometimes of the same object with different points of view and different ideas around it. And I got to participate in exactly that while working for him. When he designed the Weibo for Flubber, he had his own designs, and he also was like, I'm just not sure I've got enough scope. So he hired like 3 or 4 other designers for a day to quickly bang out like dozens of sketches to kind of really wrap his mind around a whole bunch of different forms before honing in on the one that we ended up building.
Oh, that's interesting.
It was really cool to watch the process happen, and to watch him, there were points where I had questions, like, what should these computer cards be? And he was like, great question, let's figure this out. And we sat down with him, he's like, okay, on this one I'm going to put a piece of tape, I'm going to write one of my daughter's names there. And this is the first time I saw the Easter egg being born into a classic tradition.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, he's a talented guy. When I worked with him on the costume book, he had great stories and great memories. And I think he got to do those costumes for Return of the Jedi almost by default. Just in the early concept meetings, he started drawing characters, and then it was, well, what does it look like? Well, I guess it looks like this. And Richard Marquand, specifically the director, liked what he was doing, said, Nilo should do the costumes. And of course, he'd never done costumes. He's an industrial designer, right? He went to San Jose State, but like all these guys, and like so many people at ILM where you worked, it's just that there's talent everywhere, and it crosses multiple disciplines, right? So people can step in and out of different things, and these guys specifically can just draw and just design and just brainstorm stuff. It's really amazing.
Well, and in the same way that like the early McQuarrie paintings, they don't just describe objects in the universe; they describe an entire universe. And Nilo's work does too. I know, having worked with him, what a narrative thinker he is. He's really considering the whole story and the whole universe. And actually, I just forgot this until just now, but Nilo was responsible for my first intersection with Hayao Miyazaki.
Okay.
That I was working on Home Alone 3, and this would be 1996. And he said, go to Japantown, go to their video store, buy this video called Laputa. It won't be in English. It doesn't matter. This would end up being Castle in the Sky. He said, the first 5 minutes of this movie is the greatest. And he's completely right. It's a mind-blowing opening. And I still have that VHS tape that he exhorted me to go buy.
Wow, very cool. Now, that was at ILM?
That was in Jamie Heinemann's shop. That was at Colossal Pictures Model Shop. Our job, there was a roboticist and engineer named Gary Platic, I believe, who was doing the Weibo, the hero Weibos with all of their mechanics. Jamie was doing a couple of simpler Weibos and all the stunt Weibos. Every time a Weibo got thrown into a couch, the exteriors of all Weibos were done in Jamie's shop, and I was the one doing the acuform and the dressing and the final painting on all of it. Cool. It was, what came through, the more I realized how much history he had and how I kept plumbing him for information about working with George and working on the Star Wars films, was how much he still enjoyed the process. There was no jadedness in Nilo's love of the design. And that's actually really clear in these drawings, which are, again, this is a different option for you. These are new drawings.
They are, yeah. So I kept saying to Nilo, hey, why don't you do some new sketches? You know, comic artists frequently get asked to do commissions. I said, do some sketches. We'd love to see you do some Star Wars sketches. You know, you have such a great style, that distinctive ILM style, and we'd love to see your take on it. And he finally said, all right, I'm going to do some, but I'm going to do them a little different. And I didn't know what that meant at first, but it basically meant he wanted to revisit the ideas, like you're saying. It's all about the concept and what is it in the story, and not just, you know, for him it wasn't just I want to remember the speeder bike and draw it, or the chicken walker. It was, well, what should a speeder bike be? And let's play with that, you know, and many iterations. And so that's what some of these things are. Is it's just new takes on classic designs. You know, here's a speeder bike with a scout trooper on it, but instead of sitting, he's standing. And Nilo said the concept for this was just, what if he was riding a really big cannon? And this thing, its only objective is to shoot and destroy. You know.
I tell you, I look at that drawing and it makes me maybe this will end up being a one-day build, because I look at that and it makes me itch to make a prototype.
It's just a cool design, right?
Yeah.
And one of the things he talked about also was how in that era that him and Joe and Ralph were working on things, the concept was always about making it look like it was from yesterday, but behave like it was from tomorrow.
Right.
So it's very World War I hardware, armor plates, things like that. It's not slick or stylized or you know 3D printed. It's more kit bashed and hammered out of real world stuff.
Well, a few years ago, I had an opportunity to ask Lauren Peterson, my friend and one of the original ILM modelers for Star Wars, about the difference between those early prototypes of the Star Wars ships and the ones they eventually came out with. And he talked about the aesthetic being what they were calling boilerplate.
Yes.
That it felt like you were in the engine room of a ship. So you didn't know what all those dials meant, but they clearly were part of the narrative. And when Nilo does these things, it's like up close you can see this is a ballpoint pen or a marker, and it's very, very rough. But move it like 4 feet away, and I could build an entire model from this. I don't need any more information than this drawing to build a complete shooting model.
Yeah, like you said, one day built. It'd be cool.
This is totally something we're going to do.
And I love the energy in these. You know, look at this one. Look how loose all the line work is. But one of the key things here is this is all done with ballpoint pen on paper. So nothing digital, nothing computer, nothing even pencil. He said, you know, he works without erasers, and that's part of the fun of it. You put it down and it becomes what it is. And so all this line work is really searching for what this thing could be. And in a sense, very loose, but it also has a great energy to it. And for him, he said that line work, that searching is part of the design process. It's where you're finding things.
Well, and there's one in here that I particularly love for that. Is this the stormtrooper? The trooper holding a gun that isn't drawn. Right. He started with some of the there's going to be a scope on it, and there's some sort of grip thing there, but he hasn't gotten to the gun, and yet still, in the same way that a Mobius sketch is so evocative, just a few simple lines. The same thing here. The gesture is all there.
Because you don't need it. It tells the story as it is.
Exactly.
And so, you know, all these things in different versions.
Oh, nice.
Here's a smooth speeder with a single cockpit rather than a dual cockpit.
Yeah.
A bit like the A-Wing cockpit, right?
I love the oblong guns up front, and the cockpit's much more streamlined.
Yes.
The real one is square.
Yeah, and then all the coloring on these was done in colored pencil. And he said he actually went and looked at the markers, but the markers they used at the time were turpentine-based, and he said you can't really get those anymore.
Wow.
And he said the modern markers, which are water-based, don't blend the same way. And so he said it doesn't behave like it used to when they were doing these things. So he sort of recreated the same effect through colored pencil. I thought that was fascinating.
That's really cool. This is a Probe Droid?
Probe, yeah, from Star Trek Empire.
I like the Probe Droid minion version here.
Yeah, the minion lights, yeah. And this, and he did a series of chicken walkers or scout walkers. And what he said about the scout walker was he always felt like it looked like it was built out of plywood. Yeah, like it's too rigid. And so he did a more organic, a curved surface here. And then he did 4 or 5 of these that are all in the option. And just the other day on Instagram, Doug Chang, who of course is
amazing production designer of the prequels,
yes,
many other things
yes,
over the world,
and still in there designing today, and this one creative director of it. He did a version of this, and he posted on his Instagram where he said, you know, here's something inspired by a piece I saw by Neil Lotus recently, which was one of these sketches on auction. So how cool is that?
That is so cool. I have a story to tell you. I'm going to bring an object over to show it. Hold on just a sec. Speaking of the difference between the curved and the straight, I was one of the first modelers on episode 2, and one of the things that I was asked to come up with was what might the predecessor to the Skyhopper that you see in Star Wars look like. So I came up with something that was quite similar in some ways, but added some paneling and definitely changed the whole engine design. How cool. Apparently, when George saw this, I wasn't in the meeting myself, but when George saw this, he said, well, yeah, the only reason the Skyhopper looks the way it did is because all we had was plywood. I think I'd like something more around it. It's like, fair enough, I totally get that.
But interestingly, out of that limitation came a certain aesthetic that actually kind of worked, right? I mean, same thing with the set deck. It's like the reason it looks like aircraft parts is because it is. Because you can go to the aircraft junkyard and go, I'll take that, and then one here, one there, and that was good.
Well, if you visit the Flying Fortress bomber and you look at the polycarbonate gunner's ball underneath, you're like, oh, half of Star Wars aesthetic is in this ball. It is completely clear that this was where they grabbed so much of that. It also doesn't hurt that a lot of the Star Wars stuff was built by out-of-work aerospace engineers in England in the 70s.
So that was their background.
Yeah.
But there's a whole range of different sketches. So, you know, a bunch of scout troopers, which was one of the things Nilo designed for Jedi.
I love their
a bunch of different speeder bikes. Here's one where the colors are more orange, and again, he's riding it more like a jockey on a horse in this sort of upward position, which I thought was very cool.
I like this. I like the way in which it feels so Star Wars, but it feels like a new approach, but still doesn't change that sort of hand-modded feeling of Star Wars. It's not too slick.
Right. Somewhere it fits right in. Yeah. Which is
look at that.
Yeah, these speeder bikes are some of my favorites. And again, the line work, you know, just the energy that's born out of all that is so cool.
Oh, color tauntauns.
Yes, some more color. He said he loved the tauntauns. Just a very great design and creature.
One of the things I loved about those books when they came out, when I started to look through them, is exactly the way in which the film was showing its homework. The way in which you got to see this incredible art department exploring all sorts of different avenues to come to the one they ended up with. And that was really inspiring as a young maker, realizing that it's just as much an iterative process for someone at the absolute peak of their field as it is for anybody else.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting to hear, because probably with Star Wars, there was as much in the way of documentaries and making of type books, these art books, as any other movie that had come before it, right? So I think there's probably a lot of people out there working in the film industry, you could speak to it, who were inspired by not just Star Wars the movies, but Star Wars the process of making a movie, who went on to get involved in that industry.
Well, it's the first time, you know, silent running was before that really important in 2001, but the cultural intersection with those two films was so much different than Star Wars, because in Star Wars, the modelers and the shop itself, Industrial Light and Magic, was one of the stars of the film, and became one of the sort of the cultural juggernauts that we understand. People, I mean, for me, looking at like famous Monsters of Filmland in the 70s was where I discovered people did this for a living. And, you know, I was looking at, oh my gosh, this is a Sandcrawler?
That's an Imperial tank. So before they had walkers for Hoth, they were thinking tanks, right? So this is sort of going back to a Hoth tank.
Amazing.
And all these are being sold in the auction, which is running right now. You know, because they're modern sketches, they're relatively affordable. They're starting between $150 and $500. And, you know, to get an original sketch by one of the key guys who was there at that time, pretty pretty wonderful.
A lot more. Originals would be a lot more.
Yeah, it's from the film, it'd be far more expensive.
I appreciate you constructing an option in which the price threshold is lower. It allows more people to enjoy this. I have some original sketches from films that I admire that I've purchased over the years, and I love having them up on the wall.
Yeah.
That actually, I find it really inspiring to see them framed and given a place of pride.
Well, I think these designs, designs in general in the film production process, they're so important, right? Because it essentially all starts on a page.
Yeah.
I mean, all the things around us that you build up because of, at some point, 90% of those started in somebody's sketchbook, right? I mean, that's the birth of it.
Yeah. And one of the things I loved about being a model maker, specifically for Doug Chang, which was when I was much more advanced as a model maker, is that Doug would come through and you get detailed sketches from him at the front end. And then as Doug learned to trust as Doug learned to trust that I understood what he wanted, he'd give you less instruction. Okay. And less instruction, and then he'd go, hey, under here, that's how you figured that out. Right. And you get to do this really, really cool stuff. Yeah. Oh, look at the deeply running tauntaun. How cool is that? That's fantastic. I like that he's got some sort of falcon hood on or something like that.
Yeah, just slightly different. Just sort of working from more the concept of serving a story as opposed to what did it look like exactly in that final movie.
And he's using a little bit of white out here on top of some of the sketching. I mean, again, the work is all clearly extant in each of these drawings. It's a beautiful collection.
Yeah, I mean, when I talk to Neil, he describes himself as a designer, not an artist, but there's a lot of artistry in these works, and it takes on its own life. And even though in his mind it's all about serving the director, explaining a concept to a director, I think someone like myself or anyone who's really a fan of pop culture, you look at it and you go, that's a piece of art.
Totally. I don't make the distinction.
Yeah.
Brandon, I really appreciate you taking the time to come up here and show us these. It's really inspiring. The auction's going on right now.
It's running right now. Yeah, it runs through this Friday, and you have to take a look at propstore.com.
Propstore.com. Thank you guys for joining us. See you in the Star Wars universe. Hey guys, it's time for another one-day build, and this one I'm crazy excited about because I am not in my shop. Today I am an apprentice. I am as far from my shop, in fact, as I've ever been in my life. I am literally on the other side of the world in Wellington, New Zealand, in Web Workshop, where their legendary sword maker Peter Mayan is going to take me as an apprentice today, and we're going to make a sword. I can barely stand. So what are our materials?
Okay. Essentially, we want to reproduce the blade, maybe the crossguard, maybe the pommel in aluminum.
All right.
But I understand that you've got some parts that we can use if we're running out of time.
I do. I actually I have in my collection United Cutlery Strider sword, and so I have some parts and bits and bobs.
Excellent. And these are good donor parts too, because United Cutlery bought a stunt version of each of the swords they reproduced from us.
Oh, okay.
So what they got was an exact copy of the hilt, and they got an aluminum blade that they could use as the basis for their whole pattern making.
Look at that. It's absolutely it's just beautiful.
Yeah.
Really.
So if we do get stuck for time, we can really grab these parts. And in particular, I think we're going to need to use
the leather.
Use the hilt, so the handle with the two collars on it, because I think that's where we definitely run out of time.
Right. Okay, great. I'm glad this can come in handy. I love the fact that the real one is a lot more fine than the
So
thinner.
I guess really the difference is that they're making this out of a zinc alloy, which is not anywhere as strong as steel.
Sure.
And they probably work on the principle that people are going to knock these around a bit. So the last thing they want is something that is fine in steel to be really thin, but you don't want really having people break it off and then coming back to you.
So the original color here was this color.
Yeah, so that... The reason for that is that that's the black orc blood that they were using on set. And of course, Aragorn was slicing and dicing all over the place, and so orc blood got rubbed into the hilt, so it ended up black. And yeah, for several years afterwards, I picked this up and I could feel it go a little bit squidgy until it all dried out again.
Awesome. And what would we make the guard out of?
Okay. Some assembly required.
All right. I can see that could be found in there.
Yes.
You just have to remove all the things that aren't a guard.
That's a lot of what my job is actually, because I do forge blades and other parts when it's useful, but most of the time I'll start with a block of steel and carve, essentially. And what I'm doing is I am looking at the shape inside and removing everything that isn't the part that I want.
Jay used to say we take large things and make them smaller in precise ways.
Yeah, that's the plan, with no mistakes.
All right.
And here's the pommel kit set.
Yeah, look, there's a pommel somewhere inside there. Fabulous.
Yeah. So we'll probably start with the blade. The blade is always a good place to start because everything else attaches to it.
Okay.
So we work out our basic profile. There's two ways of approaching this depending on how confident you are at being able to do a grind like a filler by holding the sword. You can either do it the way I do, which is I'll take a piece of steel, a piece of aluminum like this, I'll cut the tang onto it to give me something easy to grip.
Right.
And then I'll be standing there at a linisher and doing this.
Back and forth.
And literally, I'm holding it at the exact same level as I'm moving it and leading.
You don't have a guide on the bottom?
I used to use a guide, but I found it got in the way.
Wow.
Yeah. 30 years of practice. That's all it is.
I've only got a few hours. All right, we're going to try it.
The alternative is, I can set up a work rest just beside the contact wheel, and you can use the work rest to help you keep it level. And as long as you don't rock it, you won't be lifting or dropping it.
Yeah, I think that might make more sense for me.
Yep, in which case we're better off starting with this as a strip like this. Because
cutting out the shape?
because as soon as you cut a taper to get the blade shape, you make it much harder.
To make a fuller.
Yep. So in that case, our first thing would be cut the filler,
okay,
then cut out the shape of the blade, then grind the edges.
Excellent.
Now, something that you'll notice is that the filler here narrows as you come along.
Yeah.
That's not grounded initially. Initially, this is constant width all the way. And what tapers it is the second cut of the edges.
Nice, okay.
Yeah. So all we're looking for is a really even depth, even width cut.
A consistent.
Yeah. And then a scoop out where it comes out at the end here.
Okay. So we'll mark this out on there.
Yep.
On both sides and just start grinding.
Yep.
Okay, then once we've got that, we cut out the profile of the blade.
Yep.
And then we start grinding in the hollow grind.
Yep. Probably a good thing would be to cut a tang roughly at the moment.
Okay.
It's just a little bit easier than trying to grip that, because actually you have something smaller to grip.
And for the overall length, do you leave some also at the other end?
I tend to leave a little bit at the end, because
just the way I make swords. I always seem to grind the tip. It's a problem that you might run into as well, is that when we come to grinding this bit, it's very hard to keep it steady. And the tendency is to grind it in, cut it a bit narrower, but if we leave a bit of excess, we can then just trim the profile and get it working again. So I'm looking at about 14 millimeter width. You know, see, down here, it's down to 10 or 11, but that's only because of the edges being cut in.
All right, so
I guess if we just get a start and end point for the fuller, the nice thing is the fuller can run up right under the handguard.
the inside here, if I'm going to roughly cut the tango, I want to cut it even lower, like down there.
You can always, it's that thing. It's always easy to remove more material.
Yes, and to add.
A little thing with the shoulder of the tang is it's not something you necessarily need to worry about. But if you look at this is a Boromir blade that I'm working on. You see there's a slight curve at the shoulders. Some companies that make swords have a really sharp cut there, which looks really, really crisp. But what it does is it creates what's called a stress riser. So if you're going to have a failure, there's a good chance it'll crack across there, and your blade can just snap off completely.
That's bad.
That's bad. So